We're having a very different video today to what I usually make, which is going to be a comparison between the Win Max 2, the G1, and the Win Mini, based exclusively on hardware differences. All being different sizes, we'll go through the ones I prefer on which aspect and why. But before we do quick measurements on each of the device that I've measured, as I don't consider them to be pros or cons, I did measure the rail depth when looking at the G1 specifically. And this is the typing surface as well as the trackpad surface. You'll notice the G1 I measured both on the keyboard and on the device itself when you're not using the keyboard. Starting with weight, and of course the lighter it is, the more comfortable it is going to be on long duration. The Win Mini takes the win by default with this one. However, the G1's modularity does give it a bit of an edge when thinking of wanting to use the device in a way that you want to in that moment. When looking at the laptop grip, I find the Win Max 2 to be quite comfortable to use. I'm one of those people that likes it. However, I do find that there are accidental push, at least in my case, with the keyboard buttons because of my palm just having an easy pressure on them. Whereas the full flat grip is not the most comfortable with Win Max 2. I find that the device tends to feel like it's going to slide off my hands, and the total weight paired with having no anchor points just makes it hard for me to use that way. Now, you could handheld mode with the keyboard, but there's really no point to doing that, and the fact that you can remove it is one very particular thing about this device. But when using it on the game mode and using the laptop grip, so to speak, it feels really good. It holds great, and I know that a lot of people are concerned with the rails, specifically when looking at the vertical flat position. The rails, they give you an anchor point. It was such a big point of contention for me when I was seeing this device when ONEXPLAYER announced it, but it turns out to be one of the key aspects of why this grip and ergonomic feels so good. You can constrict it to have an anchor point to really have a good position, not feel like the device is going to slide off your hands, and it doesn't matter how you grip it, it just feels good. That goes for the vertical layout, that goes for the laptop layout. It's great, and it doesn't push against my palm, which I know a lot of people feel like it's going to be uncomfortable, and maybe it will be for some people, but for me, that's again a great surprise because it just does not give me the impression that I had looking at videos. When holding it, it's a completely different story. But here's where I'm going to lose credibility for a lot of people. For me, the Win Mini was never really good in terms of ergonomics, mainly because those corners, they just dig into my palm. It doesn't feel comfortable. It hurts after a short distance of time. Not hurt to the point that I'm in pain screaming, but you know, it's uncomfortable. The vertical layout, however, the flat one, is, if I have to use the Win Mini, that's how I use it most times. And the fact that it's a little lighter, it does make it more bearable. You don't have as much an anchor point because to me, the thumb position just makes it awkward for ergonomics. It's just a little too cramped up. So that's why it's in third. I just was never a fan of the ergonomics of that device, and it just didn't work for me. When typing, of course, the Win Max 2 has proven to be very capable, and I do have to backtrack on my comment that I thought the G1 was going to overtake it, but definitely not for the reasons that I initially thought. Now, the thing with the Win Max 2 is there is very little space between the keys, so if you're a very fast typer, I find that it tends to cause accidental push just because you're reaching for a key, but you're just a little too off-center, and you will end up pushing a key you didn't mean to push. So that's kind of a problem with the Win Max, but all things considered, it's very capable. The one advantage to the G1 is that you do have a lot of space between the keys compared to the Win Max 2. The one thing that makes it harder to type on is the layout. For example, the question mark is not where you would think it to be. It is in a different position, and that's really what makes it tough. If not considering that specifically, I find that it makes great use of its space and overall is a great solution. Although I do give the advantage to the Win Max 2, the difference is not as big as you'd think. It's still very manageable, and in my full review for productivity, I'll make sure to test my WPM with both keyboards. Traditional typing on the Win Mini is just a no-go. You don't want to do that. However, if we're talking about thumb typing, it does work much better with that specific keyboard. Thumb typing is impossible on the Win Max 2, but funny enough, it is feasible with the G1 when using the game mode. But you do not have any haptic feedback, which can be a struggle, so you have to look at the keyboard at all time if you want to use that method. The other struggle is you'll notice that on the left side you have Control and Alt, but you don't have it on the right side. So doing something, for example, like Alt Tab can be an issue because you have to bring your thumb over to the other side or another finger, and that can make for an awkward, kind of motion. But the fact that it still is a possibility is pretty great, all things considered. So while I still give the win to the Win Max 2, I do find the flexibility of the G1 to close the gap. Still, I would give a slight edge to the Win Max 2, and this is why I put it in first position. Oh, and quick thought, you could also use the G1 in a combo mode where you have the keyboard on the left and a huge trackpad on the right. So I'm going to try to see if this is actually viable for gaming as well in my gaming review. When it comes to IOs, and do keep in mind I have the first iteration of the Win Max 2 and the first iteration of the Win Mini, so some things have changed in the later models. While they all have great IO solutions, that's a strength with GPD, and ONEXPLAYER also, I would say. That said, the Win Max 2 clearly and obviously wins that challenge, and in second position would go to the G1 as it retains the Oculink and the USB-A port, regardless of the version. Of course, there's only one, but the Win Mini, depending on which one you go with, you will have an Oculink, not a USB-A, or the other way around. When thinking panel, it's impossible not to think of the specs, and that's one area where seeing them all three next to each other made me realize how much closer that the G1 feels to the Win Max 2 despite being its actual screen size, whereas the Win Mini is clearly dwarfed next to these other two. The G1 takes the win on this one because of the quality of the panel. Especially its response time to me feels a lot better. That being said, I haven't had the experience with the newest panel from the Win Mini, but at least the first one, there's a little bit of a glare when having fast motion. Now, of course, both the Win Max 2 and the Win Mini have a native landscape orientation, so I know that's important for a lot of people. I don't account into that just because I won't play the games that will necessitate for that to be a plus. So with that in mind, the G1 having the same panel of the Legion Go, the same panel as the X1 Mini, in my opinion, is one of the best panels on the entire handheld PC markets, except maybe the new OLEDs that we're starting to see, but even that is kind of debatable. They each have their pros and cons. So for me, the win is to the G1. I would put Win Mini in second and the Win Max in third. And one of the main reasons why the Win Max 2 is in third, despite its beautiful size, is of all the handheld PCs I own, it is by far the device that I experienced the most tearing on it. It is pretty much guaranteed to have any unless, of course, I activate VSync, but then there's the latency that comes with it. So it's too big a compromise that is too common in pretty much any game, including even indie titles. When looking trackpad, of course, the fact that you have two on the G1 almost makes it win by default, and also the large one is such a pleasant thing to use. If you only need to do mouse navigation with your game inputs, it's really a great implementation and a great use of like what would have been otherwise dead space. Now, one thing with the Win Mini, and the reason why it's third, is it doesn't even click, and it's rather small. As far as the one that you find on the keyboard, I would say the G1 and Win Max 2 are almost on par. I would give a slight benefit to the Win Max 2 because I find that the clicking itself does make it more pleasant, but the fact that you have two and such a huge one on the G1 itself just makes it obvious to me that it is number one in this instance. When looking at the controller layout as a whole, I would put the Win Mini in second. I like the fact that the sticks are both sticking out. At the same time, I could say that I cramp a little bit on this device due to how just compact and constricted everything feels. But for the most part, it is still pleasant the way that the buttons are positioned. When looking at the Win Max, the way that they have laid out the sticks, I find makes it for an unpleasant, especially during long duration, just layout. I wish they would have done the same as they have with the Win Mini. Again, when thinking of how much is packed into this device, it's still impressive, and I'm not trying to say that it's unusable. It's not at all. If I have to split hairs, I would give the advantage to the Win Mini between the two, but when looking at the G1, and again, those rails come in clutch, and I know it sounds weird because a lot of people are like, just don't believe it, but it helps just align everything. And the fact that your sticks and buttons are not vertically aligned makes for a very pleasant layout as well. Now, of course, because of the way that the G1 is built, they have so much more space to work with, and they have taken full advantage of that space. But there's a little more to talk about when going into buttons. I'll just leave the video play as we're talking buttons, but it will not necessarily relate to what we're saying. The first and easy one is going to be sticks because they're essentially all the same. They feel the same in terms of just the module itself, their Hall effect, all three of them. The size of the stick, the difference is so small that it's either margin error from capturing the data or like a slight variation in production. Overall, they feel identical. If there's just one thing, but I didn't count it enough to give an edge to either or, is for some reason the sticks on the G1 and the Win Max 2 have a little bit more of a rubber feeling. So I find that from a grip perspective, it holds a little better on the sticks, but the difference was so subtle that ultimately I didn't feel that it would be right to give a position. So I all gave them 1 point. When it comes down to the face button and D-pad, I gave the win to the G1. The Win Max 2 and Win Mini are even. They feel exactly the same. Like the D-pad and buttons feel exactly the same on the Win Mini and Win Max 2. And as much as I love the D-pad of the Vita, it's the tactile switches that are underneath that do not feel good. That's the, well, it's not so much that they don't feel good. It's just that the membrane found on the G1 feels just so much better. It has also a little more travel distance. It falls flush to the housing. The D-pad is light years better on the G1 versus, at least in terms of like long duration inputs. From a quick feeling, like you wouldn't even think twice. But if we're talking long duration gaming, pushing on a dome switch / tactile switch for a long duration is so unpleasant. Over time, like it's too stiff. So the membrane wins hands down when it comes to the D-pad, and from what I've tested so far, it performs really well as well. The buttons are also larger on the G1 when talking about the face buttons. And then the last thing is select start. I don't account too much to that, but I do like the idea of having select to the left and start to the right, which is the case on the Win Mini and the G1, not so much on the Win Max 2. There is one last thing that almost made me give them all even, is the fact that the Win Max 2 and the Win Mini have extra buttons, so L4, R4, something that is unfortunately missing on the G1, but nonetheless, the buttons just feel better overall. And lastly, we have the shoulders. When it comes to the bumpers, the only one that I would take a point off from is the Win Mini, because it is too thin in terms of the width. So if you lean your finger entirely over the surface, you'll have to arch it back to click the bumpers. But the triggers are fine, the tension is fine. The tension is lower on the Win Mini and the Win Max 2, by the way. Still, so I gave the Win Mini the third position. I gave second to the G1 because honestly, they're way more alike than one might think. But where I gave the edge to the Win Max 2 is the fact that it requires a little less force to actuate, number one, which is kind of a benefit, but it wasn't ultimately what gave it the point. The big difference is that you have mechanical switches, shoulders, on the Win Max 2, whereas on the G1, you have tactile. Very nice feeling tactile with a nice travel distance, but tactile nonetheless. I find that the mechanical bumpers found on the Win Max 2 are just more pleasant overall and over time. And the last test, which again is by default for the Win Mini, is the pocket test. So I'm wearing a in-home jogging, not the biggest pockets, but with a flexible material. The Win Mini just goes in there super easy, like no problems. And then when trying the G1, you'll be surprised to see that, yes, I can make it fit, but it kind of, it leans a little bit awkward on the pocket. And I don't know that I would want to leave it like that for an entire day, but say moving upstairs to go grab a coffee kind of thing, and I want to keep my hands free, I do think it is a viable option, at least with joggings. I don't think it would be feasible with jeans. And then when doing the Win Max 2, again, the joggings come in clutch, my friends, but it's just super weird. It sticks out all the way. So that was the pocket test and the fit check, I guess. All right. That puts the Win Mini in third, the Win Max in second, and the G1 in first with the way that I approach their scoring. Oh, and as a bonus, I'm pretty sure someone asked for a Legion Go comparison, so I'll probably put a screenshot on screen right about now. And if you want to break down in terms of the numbering, I'll put it on screen as well. At the end of the day, they're three fantastic devices. And we have to remember that it took 2 years for ONEXPLAYER to have a concept that can potentially surpass the Win Max 2. I like the fact that the G1, no matter how you put it, it is better balanced for gaming, whereas the Win Max 2 is better balanced for productivity. But I do find that the G1 manages to retain a good approach when it comes to productivity as well, in comparison to the Win Mini that is just not designed for that kind of use. However, the Win Mini does have the benefit of being extremely low footprint, easy to carry around, pocketable. So they all have their pros, their cons. And even though the G1 elevates the standard in terms of that approach, as a gamer, I still find that the Win Max 2 is an amazing device, and whenever we'll see a substantial upgrade where maybe we have an upgraded panel and just for GPD to revisit some of the few things, I would love to double dip for a Win Max 2 because it has been one of the best devices just because it does everything, and it does everything quite well. But I do find the G1 has a balance better catered to the main use case that I make out of these handheld PCs. But if you know that for you gaming is secondary and productivity is first, it's a no-brainer. The Win Max 2 is the one you want to get. And I forgot to mention, there will be 2 more reviews, one that will focus more on productivity and one that will focus more on gaming and just the overall experience when using the devices rather than looking at the hardware. So stay tuned for these. I hope this helped you situate the G1 on the market and maybe learn a little more about the Win Max 2 or Win Mini. In any case, if you have questions, make sure to drop them in the comment box. As always, thank you very much for clicking and watching the video. Please consider dropping a like if that was insightful in any way. And to not miss any future content, consider subscribing with the bell. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.